Hello, welcome back to the Bio 122 lecture videos. This is video 16 talking about carbohydrate digestion from the chapter 34 on animal nutrition. So in this video, we're going to talk again very specifically about carbohydrate. And if we look at what an animal diet needs to provide, one of the first things is we need to provide chemical energy because animals are heterotropic, meaning we cannot generate energy from just sunlight through photosynthesis. Instead, we have to convert glucose, uh, which is going to be the primary fuel used to generate ATP. And we also need to consume the organic building blocks, those substances that contain carbon and organic nitrogen, in order to synthesize all of our organic molecules, which is what it means to be heterotropic, meaning we cannot synthesize our entire set of organic molecules needed for life. Now, there's another term that we're going to talk about in the next video, talking about essential nutrients, which are the specific number of nutrients that we absolutely must obtain from dietary sources because we do not possess the enzymes in order to create them. Now, this is extremely species specific. So the essential nutrients for a human is not the same as, say, for a cat, because of different evolutionary development that has occurred depending on the environment we live in. And so when we talk about carbohydrates, they are technically not essential nutrients because we can actually convert fats, particularly fatty acids, and even proteins into glucose through uh, metabolism in our body. So it is possible uh, to not consume any carbohydrate and live, but that doesn't mean that it would be good for health. Uh, so let's start first talking about the carbohydrates. Where are they going to be found? They're in the form of sugars, which is unfortunately too much of our carbohydrate diet, but starches and fibers are also referred to as the complex carbohydrates. And the sugars can also be obtained from fruits, but from vegetables, milk, and honey are all natural sources of sugars. And of course, as humans, we've become very good at creating artificial sources or highly processed sources. The types of carbohydrates that are actually absorbed into the body are only the monosaccharides, which are the building blocks of all other carbohydrates. And so there's three different monosaccharides: glucose, fructose, and galactose. Um, the only one that's really useful by the body is glucose because that's the energy, the chemical energy source for making ATP. Now, normally when we refer to a sugar, we're talking about something like table sugar. So instead of glucose, we're talking about sucrose. But sucrose is simply one molecule of glucose attached to one molecule of fructose. And when we drink milk or other dairy products, lactose is simply a glucose molecule with, instead of a fructose, it's with a galactose molecule. Now, these are two of the simplest types of sugars that would be consumed. They are referred to as disaccharides because they have two of the monosaccharides. And so, whether it's milk or table sugar, these are extremely easy to digest, and in fact, too easy. That's meaning that they get digested very quickly. Because if we think about it, the only thing that's needed to digest these is to break one single bond between the glucose and the fructose, or the galactose and the glucose in the case of lactose. So these are very rapidly digested and therefore very rapidly absorbed into the body, which means that there's suddenly a big burst coming into the body at once, which is one of the issues with diabetes, creating too high of a glucose level in the blood and having to continuously regulate that. So, but in the end, everything that we're going to be ingesting into the body, or excuse me, absorbing into the body is essentially going to be glucose, because that's what we're going to use for the first steps in glycolysis. Now, glucose is the product, is the building block of every carbohydrate, and plants also, well, they are the source of glucose in the form of starch. And then animals can also store glucose, and this is a molecule produced by the liver called glycogen. So it can be stored in the form of glycogen for about 7 days. Now, all of these would be referred to as polysaccharides, meaning there's, instead of disaccharide, which means 2, the polysaccharide is many individual glucose molecules. And so now we have multiple linkages. And so this is illustrating each of these hexagons here indicate one glucose molecule. And so there's a particular structured starch, which looks like this, which again is the storage form that plants use for glucose, because they need ATP also. This is one of the more difficult to digest substances. This is why we start digesting this in the mouth using the saliva. The salivary amylase starts working on starch as soon as the starch comes into the mouth, which kind of indicates how long it's going to take to break apart all these other bonds. Much more complicated. Here's another illustration showing the typical structure of starch with these arms coming off. This is the plant form. Glycogen, again, is the animal form. And they're exactly the same as far as the building blocks. The only difference is the particular pattern of their structure. You can see some similarities between these arms in glycogen and starch, but you notice they're much longer and more complex in the form of glycogen. And then there is another type of fiber that plants use for their structural connective tissue, which is a fiber. So cellulose fiber, which is now just simply a long string of glucose molecules. As humans, and generally all animals, we have the ability, because we have enzymes that can work on starch and break it down into individual glucose molecules. We have enzymes that can work on glycogen and break it down into individual glucose molecules. But animals do not possess the enzyme that would be able to break the fiber polysaccharide down. So this is generally not digestible by animals per se, unless we have some help from a prokaryote. Bacteria possess the enzymes to do so. There are a few animals that do, termites, for instance. So there's a few insects that are able to break down fiber as part of their natural diet. Now, where do we actually produce glycogen? Well, if you remember, we talked previously about one of the negative feedback systems of blood sugar control. And so in the case of low blood sugar, the pancreas releases a hormone called glucagon that travels through the blood to the liver. The liver provides the structure where we do these conversions. And so glucagon triggers the process in the liver to release the enzymes to turn glycogen back into glucose therefore releasing glucose into the blood. So that's how the pancreas is able to increase blood sugar by taking glucose from stored glycogen. Conversely, which is not shown in the slide, if there's too much glucose in the blood, the pancreas secretes insulin, which reverses this process so that the liver starts taking glucose and forming glycogen from it. So it can be released later on when you're in between meals. So this becomes a very important part of animal metabolism, is just trying to keep a steady level of glucose in the blood. So again, here we're showing these negative feedback systems, either insulin or glucagon, causing opposite effects on glucose levels. Now, let's go back to the topic of fiber, because this is the type of carbohydrate that is indigestible. It comes from plants, so particularly in the grasses, like wheat, but it's available in a lot of fruits. So here's apricots, apples, and even in berries, and grapes, because fiber is used as the structural material for plants. And so this is going to be found in any like whole food. One of the things that happens in the processing of foods is removing most of the fiber mechanically, which is what makes a lot of processed foods less nutritious, even though the fiber technically is indigestible, but it will also contain quite a bit of other vitamins and minerals that can be broken apart from it, not by us, but by bacteria that live in us. So while it's not a technical nutrient, it is important for health for one reason. It seems to just simply essentially clean out the intestine, helping to remove toxic substances, because it will form the bulk of the feces and therefore prevent potential chemicals and things that normally might be able to cause cancers if they were to linger in the intestine. This helps remove them very quickly. And that's thought to be one of the huge health benefits of fiber. But we also have fiber combined with the bile acids that are released by the liver to digest fats, but also cholesterol. And by binding with them, it can prevent some of these acids and the cholesterol from being absorbed into the body. So for that reason, fiber can also help regulate things like cholesterol levels in the blood to health benefits. Now, some animals can digest fiber and use it as a nutrient, but not without help. So humans don't have this ability other than a little bit in our large intestine, where our bacteria can digest fiber to produce vitamin E. But the actual ability to gain glucose, to break the fiber down so that you can use it for energy, the animals that can do that have to gain benefit from a bacteria. The ruminant animals that we study, where the rumen, the largest container in the stomach, contains these bacteria. So the food is first brought to the rumen, and it is beginning to be broken down, breaking down these fiber into smaller carbohydrates that could then be broken down into glucose by the animal's own enzymes after being sent back up to the mouth to be re-chewed in the form of cud. other animals that are not ruminants that are also consuming a lot of fiber in order to extract the nutrition from it need to have a long cecum. So animals like the rabbit that we saw, but also animals like the koala bear eating bamboo leaves will have a very, very long cecum because that cecum contains these bacteria. And then there's a few other animals, like I just mentioned a little bit previously about termites. Termites also um, are able to break down the fibers, but again, by using bacteria. And in many cases, these bacteria are not actually in their body. These bacteria are in their environment. So they cover their body and they can actually help dissolve the cellulose fibers in the wood that they're eating. So there have been several ways in evolution in which animals have adapted to extracting nutrition even from this very difficult to break down fiber. Okay, so that completes the beginning part of the nutrition lecture, specifically talking about carbohydrates. Our next video is going to talk about the other essential nutrients. Good day.